Saint Charlos is unironically one of the greatest characters in One Piece, and he has a very important role to play in the final saga. This series legitimately would not be the same without him. Saint Charlos is the hero we need, but not the one we deserve, because nobody deserves that. I have a personal appreciation for what I refer to as punching bag villains. In One Piece, these characters are often caricature-esque incarnations of evil, generally very devoid of any kind of depth, like their only characteristic is to be a rotting sack of nuts. But they're also not a threat in any way, by which I mean they're not traditionally strong. Characters like Helmeppo and Bellamy were never a real threat to us, and their purpose was to enhance the person who owned the fist it is that connected with their faces. Oda speedruns these type of characters. Within mere pages, he conjures an existence like genetically engineered to infuriate us as readers as quickly as possible, so that we can ultimately derive maximum satisfaction from their disposal. And by far the greatest of these punching bags is Saint Charlos, who also physically resembles a punching bag. Charlos is introduced in chapter 499, which already annoys me because I like round numbers, but the very first panel we see of him is riding and beating a human slave whilst eating an ice cream cone. He's also drawn with a resin bubble over his head so as not to breathe the putrid fumes of the masses. So it's a very strong aesthetic statement that is further enhanced with so many exclamation marks. One of which is that we learn that Charlos has a total of 8 wives. In fact, in the past he's had up to 13, but he has since dismissed 5 of them. He doesn't refer to these wives by name, only by number. For example, he dismisses wives 1 through 5 because he is tired of them. And we also see him recruit a new wife, wife number 13, who is now wife number 8. Her name is Marie, and she is/was a nurse. And Charlos became mildly infatuated with her, shot Marie's existing fiance with the intent to kill, and then abducted Marie to a fate likely worse than death. In all honesty, her husband was the lucky one. He got shot and then carried to hospital by Zoro. But Marie, to this day, we still have no idea what happened to her. However, by this point, within a grand total of 4 pages, Oda has introduced a character who is engaged in slavery, attempted murder, and implied future sexual assault. So like I said, Oda is speedrunning character creation. He is practiced enough to know how to hit all of the beats with exact precision to get the world record, because I really don't think there is a character more hated more quickly in all of the media than Saint Charlos. He just accomplishes so much in such a short amount of time. And all of this wrapped in a deformed, fleshy package. The twisted, ugly existence of Charlos is well and truly physically manifested through his dripping nose, multiple chins, and even the shape of his hair, which makes him look like a literal dickhead. So you want to know something wild? Charlos, that guy. Charlos is only 24 years old. I thought he was like 40. In fact, his voice actor, Chafudin, is a man hired to play almost exclusively middle-aged men. So it's a very purposeful decision to both aesthetically and orally age Charlos up. Orally as in ears, not as in mouth. Although I suppose the sound comes from the mouth and then goes to the ears. Doesn't matter. Orally, Charlos sucks. He sucks. And what I hate most is that Charlos has the capacity to make a 5 o'clock shadow look horrendous. Do you have any idea how hard it is to look bad with a 5 o'clock shadow? But somehow Charlos pulls it off. And it adds to the visceral disgust, because Charlos is an unusually textured character. You have the rough sandpaper face being combined with the dripping gloopy snot, and again, it's almost like he's genetically engineered to be the most repulsive presence imaginable. He's also very bottom heavy and extremely top empty due to the lack of brain, which is exactly why the world nobles are so terrifying. They don't need to be smart. Their power is just that overwhelming. You can't reason with them. They don't follow logic. The world follows them. Whatever they think is what the world then turns into logic. It really is like having the power to bend reality. So the astronaut getup is quite appropriate because they may as well live on a completely different planet. And they are the physical manifestation of every negative human trait shoved into a blender, eaten by a Sea King, and then shat out in the shape of Saint Charlos. The reason why I isolate Charlos in particular is because he is Oda's chosen representative. Charlos is the spotlight figure, and in fact, he makes the other world nobles look comparatively reasonable. For example, his father, Saint Roswad, is much more responsible with money at the very least, not doing things like blowing 500 million berries on mermaids to feed to piranhas. And then when Charlos was injured by Muscard, Roswad immediately hopped onto his nearest slave and went to care for his son. That is how bad Charlos is. He makes Saint Roswad look good by comparison. And with his sister, Saint Sharia, well, at least she has aesthetics on her side, whereas Charlos has nothing. He is the single most embodiment of every worst quality that we're trying to purge the world of, which is why that makes Charlos, in my opinion, more more important than any other villain. Even ones like Blackbeard and Sakazuki, who have done objectively horrific things. And even more so than the Five Elders or even Emu, because they're the facilitators maintaining the world order, but the world order itself is Charlos. He is what they're trying to maintain, which makes Charlos a very unfortunate nexus of pure disappointment. Oh, I forgot to mention this, but Charlos also has a bit of a mermaid fetish. Mermaids are always on his mind. He is always thinking of mermaids. However, I would argue that Charlos is a compulsory element of One Piece, because he is the necessary evil that allows us to experience a full depth of emotion. I've often said that a hero is only as strong as their villain, and in many cases I would even say that Luffy has been upstaged by series villains. Doflamingo, Katakuri, and honestly, yes, Saint Charlos. Because I don't need to see Luffy punch Charlos anywhere near as much as I just need to see Charlos get punched. And this world would be very boring without characters like him. I mean, if everyone were as good as Luffy, then that good would be devalued to average. We wouldn't have any peaks because we'd have no valleys. We would just have flat plains. So we can only see how good a character is via the comparison to the most evil. And Charlos provides us with a magnificent endpoint of that spectrum. However, with that said, he has to be implemented absolutely perfectly. A character like Charlos is very dangerous because he is completely flat. Not physically, of course. Physically, he is quite spherical, but I mean that his character writing is very flat. He's very much one-note evil with no opportunity for intrigue or development, which means that you need to use him very sparingly, or that one note is going to get boring pretty quickly. His existence is almost like that of a pantomime villain. Whenever you see him appear on stage, his only purpose is to be booed by the audience. Everyone hates the character, but the show doesn't work without them. And speaking of shows, Saint Charlos on stage in real life has actually been done before. Charlos quite frequently gets used in the One Piece live shows as a quick and easy way to create a visceral feeling of disgust without needing to spend a ton of time and money on special effects like you'd need to do with the more serious, powerful villains. And I have to read Saint Charlos' character summary from the One Piece 2011 premiere show because this sounds wild. Charlos hires Arlong and Spandam to kidnap Nami and Nika Robin, and he tricks Enel into capturing the rest of the Straw Hat Pirates. I mean, mate, I don't know about that. Charlos may look like an astronaut, and you know what? Even if he was, there is still no planet where he tricks Enel. However, the very existence of Charlos triggers this sudden emotional engagement, like a light switch desire to see a dude get thwacked in the face. So in that way, Charlos is a very powerful character. And of course, he also serves as a direct contrast to Moscard, which is interesting because I have no doubt that Don Quixote Moscard's actions were just as horrible as Charlos back in the day, but now they represent opposing ideals. Charlos is our true depth of depravity, a symptom of what this world has become, and Moscard is what the world could become if a cure to this depravity is found. He proves that even the worst individuals are capable of change. So I guess we have to ask ourselves the ultimate question. Is Saint Charlos capable of change? Is Saint Charlos redeemable? Will Saint Charlos be our ultimate series glow-up? I mean, it would be the ultimate power move to reform him in some way. However, I personally don't think it's possible, because there is one important difference between Charlos and Moscard, which is that we never actually saw Moscard's evil on screen. It all took place over here. You see, you can't see the evil I'm doing. That's where Moscard did it all. Whereas we saw a ton of Charlos's evil deeds. In fact, we've seen exclusively only evil deeds from Charlos, which is probably why we never actually saw Moscard's dickery on screen, because if we had seen that, then we'd probably have a very hard time accepting him as well. That's the power of the author. Oda can take two characters who have both done equally as horrible things, but if he only shows us the actions of one of them, then we are going to hate him and be much more amenable to the other. That's why I don't think Charlos has a shot at redemption, because he is Oda's elected representative of everything we're trying to eradicate. So I think the only option is to eradicate Charlos himself. Eradicate Charlos himself. It's kind of Freudian, actually. I say itself because Charlos is a representative of just bad things. He's not a person. He's just things rolled into this weird, ugly lump of dough, like sweaty, sandpapery dough. Because really, if we eradicate all of the bad traits and we build our utopia, then Charlos ceases to exist, because outside of those traits, he has nothing. He is nothing. Fellow punching bags like, say, Helmeppo and Bellamy were never pure evil. Bellamy was a good kid who got taken down a dark, flamingo-filled path, and Helmeppo was a spoiled brat with daddy issues. But both of them were able to come to terms with their flaws and forge a new life for themselves. For Charlos to do the same thing, he'd need to recognize that he has flaws to begin with, which I imagine is pretty difficult when all your life you've been told that you're an omnipotent, perfect God man. So again, never say never, but I think it's gonna be mighty difficult to turn St. Charles into a real boy. Although even in this state, Charles does definitely have his fans. There's a small ironic pocket of appreciation for St. Charles within the One Piece fanbase. For example, on Reddit, they even wish him a happy birthday every year. And each and every time, the top comment is always something along the lines of, "I ain't gonna say happy birthday for this, MF." And if you were curious, St. Charles was born on the 1st of June. So let me know in the comments if you share a birthday with this MF. So he does have a fan base, albeit a very small fan base. I mean, St. Charles ranked 185th in the World Top 100 character poll, although I would argue that that's actually pretty damn good when you consider that over 1,000 characters were in contention. The most hilarious part though is St. Charles fan art, because yes, it does exist. Whether it should exist or not, that's a different question, but it does. Everything from faithful birthday well wishes to full-on 3D renderings, and even this very curious and cursed image I stumbled upon depicting Charlos as a mischievous cherub. But while Eiichiro Oda definitely holds the world record for speedrunning hated characters, I have to say I hold a world record of my own, or at least what I'm going to assume is my own personal world record, because I'm pretty sure that I am currently the owner of the world's largest collection of St. Charles fan art, simply out of necessity, because sometimes I need to talk about him, and my poor channel artists have had to facilitate that. But by and large, he is a very disliked character, which is completely fair. In fact, it means that he's doing his job properly. And if it makes you feel any better, this often goes over people's heads, but someone did try to assassinate St. Charles during the reverie. Apparently, Moscard let the attacker escape, and we're still not entirely sure who the culprit is to this day. But it kind of proves my point. Why try to kill Charlos over anyone else? Why Charlos? He's nothing. He's just bleh. And that bleh is the nexus of evil. And as such, his existence allows us to fully experience so many great things. Without Charlos, we wouldn't have the best punch in the series, perhaps even the best punch in all of media. Without Charlos, we wouldn't be able to fully redeem Hartchan, who looks like an angel compared to him. Without Charlos, we also wouldn't have been able to fully redeem Moscard, as we previously explored. And most importantly, Charlos gives us a strong core reason to want to bring down the world government. Because before him, yeah, there was corruption, yeah, there was a sprinkling of genocide here and there, but the most profound need to dismantle this organization only presented itself with the existence of Charlos. And I hate to say this, I really do, but as painful as it is, we need Charlos for One Piece to have the full depth that it does, and his role is far from finished. And the mystery I most need to know is which of those 19 founding families does Charlos belong to? Is he a Don Quixote like Doflamingo and Moscard? Or perhaps he's a Saturn like Old Man Jay Garcia? Or potentially even a Figureland, just like Shanks. In fact, I can picture the introduction box right now. St. Charlos, nephew of Emperor Red-Haired Shanks. But with that in mind, when June 1st next rolls around, I would urge each and every one of you to just take a moment to appreciate St. Charlos. Just have a bit of a think about what he brings to your life before promptly and vigorously, I insist vigorously, mentally punching him in the face.